John had always loved his small, quiet house at the edge of Maplewood Lane. It was a cozy place, painted light blue, with a little garden in front and a big oak tree shading the porch. Every morning, he would step out, breathe in the fresh air, and wave to his neighbors who seemed to know everyone by name. Life was simple, calm, and predictable. But one sunny Monday morning, John noticed something unusual in his mailbox. There was a letter with a bold heading, Notice of Violation, Homeowners Association. John froze. Homeowners Association? That was strange. He had bought his house outside the HOA jurisdiction. He was not a member. A quick glance at the letter made his heart race. The letter accused him of leaving his trash cans visible after the scheduled pickup day. John frowned. That doesn't make sense. I never leave my trash cans out. John tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a mistake. But over the next few days, more letters arrived. Each one was slightly more aggressive than the last. One said he would be fined $50 for a violation of community standards. Another threatened a lien on his property if he didn't comply immediately. The handwriting was formal, almost cold, and each envelope had the HOA logo stamped on it. He showed the letters to his neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, a friendly lady who had lived on the street for more than 20 years. "Oh, John," she said gently, "maybe they just made a mistake. These HOA people are sometimes very strict. Just pay the fine, and they will leave you alone." But John shook his head. "I'm not part of any HOA, Mrs. Thompson. I don't pay them. How can they even threaten me?" Mrs. Thompson shrugged. "I don't know, maybe it's some kind of new rule?" John didn't feel reassured. Something about the letters made his skin crawl. He felt like someone was watching him, waiting for a small mistake. Even his calm morning routine started to feel tense. He would peek through the curtains before stepping out, checking if someone was near his mailbox or lurking around the street. Then came the third letter. This one was hand-delivered, slipped under his front door. The paper was thick, and the words seemed harsher than before. It said he must immediately remove any non-compliant garden decorations or face legal action and possible police involvement. John read the lines again and again. His hands shook slightly. Police involvement? This was no longer just a simple threat about trash cans. John spent that night tossing and turning in bed. The wind outside whispered through the trees, and each creak of his house sounded louder than usual. He imagined the HOA officer standing outside his house, watching his every move. It felt like a nightmare, but he was wide awake. The next morning, he decided to take action. He walked outside, pretending to be calm, and inspected his garden, trash cans, and every corner of his property. Everything was perfectly normal. He even double-checked the HOA's website to make sure there hadn't been a recent expansion or rule change. Nothing. His house was safe, legal, and completely outside their control. Yet, the letters kept coming. And then, things started to escalate in small ways. First, a car with tinted windows appeared on the street, parked near his house for hours. John wondered if it belonged to the HOA. He snapped pictures with his phone, trying not to look suspicious, but every time he looked out the window, the car was still there. Next, a man wearing a dark suit walked slowly past his house multiple times in one day, looking up at the windows and taking notes on a clipboard. John's heart pounded in his chest. Who was he? The HOA? Why were they doing this? He felt trapped in his own home. His safe, quiet street suddenly felt like a battleground. John knew he needed advice. He called his friend Mike, who was a lawyer. Mike laughed lightly at first. "John, if you're not in the HOA, they cannot legally threaten you. They have no authority over your property. Ignore the letters and don't respond." But John couldn't ignore it. Every letter, every strange car, and every suspicious figure made him more nervous. He felt a rising tension that he could not shake. He even imagined knocking on the doors of the HOA members to confront them, but hesitated. What if it made things worse? That evening, as he sat at his kitchen table, the sunset painted orange and red stripes across his walls, a soft knock came at his front door. John's heart jumped. He froze, staring at the door. Who could it be at this hour? Slowly, he walked over and peeked through the peephole. No one was there. Only a small envelope had been slipped under the door. Hands trembling, John picked it up. The words were written in capital letters. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. Do not ignore this notice. John sank into his chair. He felt a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. How could a homeowners association dare threaten him when he didn't even belong to it? Why were they targeting him specifically? Was it a mistake or something more deliberate? He looked around his cozy home, the oak tree outside, the familiar mailbox, the quiet street. Suddenly, all of it felt different. It wasn't safe anymore. The calm, peaceful life he had enjoyed was under threat, and he had no idea how far this HOA would go. John took a deep breath. He had to decide. Should he confront them, call the police, or just ignore the letters like his friend advised? The suspense was unbearable. One thing was certain, his life was about to change, and he couldn't go back to the way things were before. The first chapter of his fight against the mysterious HOA had begun. And John had no idea how dangerous it would get or how unexpected the next knock on his door would be. The next morning, John woke to an uneasy silence. The street looked the same as always, a clean, quiet, sun streaming over Maplewood Lane, but in his mind, something had shifted. His house no longer felt like a refuge. Every shadow seemed larger. Every rustle in the trees sounded like a warning. He had hoped the letters were a mistake. Maybe one wrong envelope. But as he stepped outside to get the newspaper, he noticed a new, unfamiliar car parked across the street. The windows were darkly tinted, and it seemed to hum with quiet menace. The license plate didn't match anything he recognized in the neighborhood. John's stomach tightened. Could it be the HOA? Was someone watching him now, just like he feared? He quickly grabbed his phone and took a picture, trying not to look too obvious. But as he did, the car's passenger window rolled down slightly, as if someone was watching him through the glass. Shaking, John went back inside. He thought about ignoring it. But deep down, he knew this was different from the letters. The HOA could send threats on paper, but this was real, present, immediate. Someone was outside his home, watching. He decided to call the HOA office. Maybe he could resolve this once and for all. He dialed the number from the letters, trying to sound calm. A woman answered with a crisp, professional tone. Hello, Maplewood HOA. How can I help you? John explained, I am not a member of your HOA. I live outside your jurisdiction. Yet I keep receiving threatening letters about fines, violations, and now there's a car parked outside my house. I don't understand why you are targeting me. There was a pause on the other end. Then, a voice cold and deliberate said, Sir, our records show you are in violation. You need to comply immediately. Failure to do so will result in legal action. Police may become involved if necessary. John's hands trembled as he held the phone. I'm not part of your HOA. You have no authority over me. The line went silent for a moment before the woman said flatly, We will see. And then she hung up. John sank into his chair. The tension in his chest grew heavier. This wasn't a mistake anymore. The HOA wasn't just sending letters, they were escalating. And now they were making it personal. That evening, John decided to document everything. He set up his phone to record the front yard. Every knock, every car, every stranger that passed would be captured. He felt a flicker of control amidst the fear. At least he would have proof if things got worse. But the universe seemed determined to push him further into chaos. That night, as John tried to sleep, he heard a tapping at his window. He froze, heart hammering. The sound came again, soft, deliberate. He peeked through the blinds. Nothing. Just the oak tree swaying in the wind, casting long shadows across the porch. His pulse slowed slightly. Maybe it was just the branches, or maybe it was someone testing him, seeing if he would be afraid. By morning, the tension had grown unbearable. John noticed small, strange things around his property, a rock on his driveway that wasn't there before, footprints near the back gate, and the faint smell of gasoline from the street, almost as if someone had driven by slowly to intimidate him. John tried to talk to a neighbor, Mr. Harris, who was friendly but part of the HOA. "Have you noticed anything unusual?" John asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Mr. Harris looked uneasy, then said, I've heard about your letters. Some of the HOA folks, they can be aggressive. But you know, it's probably best not to get involved. Just pay the fines." John shook his head. "I'm not part of your HOA. Why should I pay fines for rules that don't apply to me?" Mr. Harris said nothing, just avoided eye contact. John realized he was alone in this. No support, no protection except his own wits and the law, if it came to that. Days passed, and the harassment continued. Another letter arrived, this one with a warning in red ink. Immediate compliance required. Failure will result in legal and police action. John felt a surge of anger and fear. He decided he could no longer stay passive. He reached out to a local lawyer friend, Mike, for advice. Mike confirmed what John already suspected: HOA rules cannot apply to him. Legally, they had no power. But the psychological game they were playing, the letters, the cars, the random visits, was terrifying. That night, John stayed awake, listening. The house was still, except for a soft sound, the faint creak of the back gate. He grabbed his phone, ready to record. But before he could move, he heard a voice, low and mocking. "Better watch yourself." John froze. The voice didn't belong to anyone he recognized. And in that moment, he realized something chilling: the HOA wasn't just trying to enforce rules, they were trying to scare him out of his own home. The tension had reached a breaking point. John knew something bigger was coming. Something that would force him to confront this threat head-on. And deep down, he understood the fight was no longer just about fines or letters, it was about his peace, his home, and his safety. For the first time, he thought seriously about calling the police. Maybe it was the only way to stop this escalating nightmare. But he hesitated. Would the police understand? Would they see him as the victim or think he was overreacting? One thing was certain: John's life had changed forever. The quiet street he once loved had become a stage for tension, fear, and unseen threats. And he had no choice but to face whatever came next. The storm was building, and John was standing right in its path, unsure of who or what would arrive first. John had started to feel like his house was no longer his own. Every morning, the quiet street seemed stranger, almost hostile. The unfamiliar car still parked across the road, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. And now, he noticed footprints in the soft soil of his backyard, leading toward the fence but disappearing before the gate. Someone had been there. Someone was watching him. He tried to focus on work, but his mind kept replaying every letter, every knock, every shadow. The fear was like a quiet drumbeat, growing louder with each passing day. Then, that evening, something happened that changed everything. A knock. Loud. Aggressive. Not at the door, but at the window. John jumped. He hadn't heard a car arrive, hadn't seen anyone approach. He moved slowly toward the window, peeking through the blinds. A man in a dark jacket was standing on the porch, just staring. No words. Just silence. John's hands shook as he stepped back. Should he confront him? Call the police? Before he could decide, the man left, but left behind a letter tucked under the doormat. John's heart pounded as he picked it up. You are warned. Comply or face serious consequences. This is your last notice. John read it over and over. Comply? What could he possibly comply with? He was not a member of the HOA. The rules did not apply to him. But now, it wasn't just threats on paper. The letters, the men watching, the footprints, this was a direct invasion of his home and privacy. He called his friend Mike, the lawyer.
Mike, it's gone too far. They're outside my house. Someone is watching me. I can't ignore this anymore.
Mike's voice was calm but firm.
John, legally, you have the right to defend your home. HOA has no power over non-members. But if they are showing up in person, you must document everything. Photos, videos, everything.
And yes, it's time to involve the police.
John felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief that he wasn't powerless. Dread because he didn't know what would happen when the authorities came.
The thought of police arriving, HOA members lying and exaggerating, and strangers questioning him made his stomach churn.
That night, he stayed awake, watching from the window.
At 11:37 p.m., he saw the dark car again, creeping slowly past his house. The headlights barely flickered, and for a moment, he thought it might just be someone driving home. But the car stopped, engine idling, and a figure got out. They paced slowly in front of the house, looked up at the windows, then got back in the car and left.
John felt a surge of anger.
Enough, he whispered to himself.
This ends tonight.
He prepared a folder with all the letters, photos, and videos he had collected. Then he called the local police non-emergency line and explained the situation: threatening letters, people showing up outside his house, possible harassment.
The dispatcher promised an officer would come by to check the situation and ensure John's safety.
John felt a small sense of control returning. At least someone official would witness the harassment. A few hours later, there was a knock at the door, but this time it was different.
Strong, confident. 2 uniformed police officers stood outside, flashlights in hand.
Sir, we received a report about harassment.
Can we come in and ask you some questions?
John led them inside, showing them the letters, the videos, the photos.
The officers listened carefully, nodded, and took notes.
Then they stepped outside to talk with anyone nearby. John watched from the living room window as they spoke with neighbors.
Minutes felt like hours. Finally, one officer returned.
Sir, based on what we've seen, it appears you're being threatened by HOA members.
You are legally in the clear. They cannot force compliance on a non-member. However, if anyone approaches your property again, we can respond immediately.
You also have the right to file a harassment complaint.
John exhaled, a wave of relief and tension crashing together.
But the letters continued to arrive over the next few days.
The HOA was clearly testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push.
Then, one afternoon, a different kind of threat arrived, a formal letter from an attorney claiming that John's garden decorations violated HOA rules and must be removed immediately.
John read it and laughed bitterly.
Seriously, he muttered.
They have no authority over me.
But this was no longer about compliance.
It was a battle of wills.
The HOA was escalating in both threats and intimidation, and John realized he was at the center of a storm he couldn't ignore. For the first time, he considered fighting back, not just passively documenting, not just calling the police, but taking a stand that would send a clear message. He wasn't going to let an organization he didn't belong to terrorize his life. As night fell, John sat by his window, looking out at the dark street. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible. He knew that the next move, whether by HOA or police, would determine the course of this battle. And deep down, he understood something that made his pulse quicken: this was only the beginning. The conflict was escalating, the stakes were rising, and John's fight for his home and peace of mind had entered a dangerous new chapter.
John's life had become a quiet battlefield.
Each day, he moved through his house like a soldier in enemy territory. The letters, the dark car, the random footsteps, all of it had eroded his sense of safety. He knew the HOA had no legal authority over him, but that didn't matter.
Fear had a power of its own. It was a Thursday evening when the turning point arrived.
The sun had dipped behind the rooftops, painting the street in shadows. John was reviewing his folder of letters and photos when he heard the unmistakable sound of someone rifling through his mailbox. He froze.
Heart pounding.
Slowly, he approached the window.
A man in a dark hoodie was bending over the mailbox, stuffing something into his bag.
Before John could react, the man looked up, making brief eye contact.
A chilling smile touched his lips, then he walked briskly away, disappearing into the shadows. John felt a surge of panic. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was trespassing. And now, it was personal. He grabbed his phone and called the local police. His voice trembled slightly as he explained the situation. "They're here. Someone just rifled through my mailbox. I don't know what to do." The dispatcher assured him officers were on the way. Minutes later, John heard sirens in the distance, and he felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that help was coming. Dread because he knew the HOA might try to manipulate the situation before the police arrived. 2 officers arrived quickly, flashing their badges and introducing themselves. "Sir, we received your call. Can you tell us exactly what happened?" John guided them outside, showing them the mailbox and explaining the history of letters, cars, and strange visitors. The officers nodded, taking notes and asking careful questions. Then, one officer asked, "Do you have any idea who might be behind this?" John hesitated. "It's the HOA. They've been sending letters, showing up outside my house, trying to scare me. But I'm not a member. They have no right over my property." The officers exchanged a glance. "We'll check the area and talk to anyone nearby. If anything happens again, call us immediately. You have the right to remain safe in your home. Nobody can legally threaten you." John felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this would finally end. But as he watched the officers leave to patrol the street, a black SUV slowly rolled past his house, windows dark, engine almost silent. John's chest tightened. The HOA wasn't done. Over the next few days, John noticed a subtle shift. The letters became less frequent, but each one carried a heavier tone, implying consequences if he continued to ignore their rules. One letter even hinted that neighbors might start reporting him for petty issues, trying to create a false case. John realized something important: the HOA wasn't going to stop unless someone officially told them to. This was more than paper threats, it was a psychological war. They wanted to intimidate him, isolate him, and make him question himself. He decided to prepare for a confrontation. He organized all his evidence, letters, photos, videos, and the timeline of events. Every encounter, every suspicious car, every trespassing incident was documented. John knew he had to be ready. If the HOA came again, he would stand his ground and involve the police immediately. Then, one late evening, as John was checking his front yard lights, he saw movement. A familiar figure was approaching, this time one of the HOA officers he had seen before. The man walked deliberately to the edge of John's property, clipboard in hand, and started inspecting the lawn. John didn't panic. Instead, he stepped onto the porch and called out firmly, "You are trespassing. Leave my property immediately, or the police will be called." The man froze for a moment, clearly startled that John wasn't intimidated. Then he muttered something about rules and walked away, muttering under his breath. John watched until he disappeared into the shadows, then immediately called the police. Within minutes, sirens cut through the quiet street. Officers arrived, spoke to John, and checked the area. This time, there was no question, they recognized that John was legally protected, and the HOA officer had clearly overstepped. As the police drove away, John stood on his porch, the night wind brushing against his face. He felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: control. The threat wasn't gone, but now he knew he could fight back. The HOA had escalated, tried to scare him, and pushed boundaries. But John had survived. He had stood up, documented everything, and involved the authorities. The turning point had come. From here, it was no longer just fear, it was a battle he was prepared to win. The night was quiet again, but John knew it was only temporary. The HOA had tested him, and they might try again. But for the first time, he felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next. Ready to defend his home, his peace, and his life. And deep inside, he sensed that the real confrontation was just around the corner. John's heart raced as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting long shadows over Maplewood Lane. He had spent the entire afternoon checking and rechecking his property,
making sure every letter, photo, and video was organized. Every sound outside made him flinch.
The air seemed thick, almost electric, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Then, it happened.
The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway made John freeze.
He glanced out the window.
A marked police car pulled up slowly in front of his house. 2 officers stepped out, badges glinting in the fading sunlight. Their presence should have brought relief, but instead, John felt a surge of tension. He opened the door, trying to hide his nerves.
"Officers, thank you for coming," he said, his voice shaking slightly.
"We received your calls," one officer replied, calm but serious.
"Can you show us what's going on?"
John led them inside, motioning to the folder filled with letters, photos, and videos. He explained everything: the HOA letters, the strange cars parked outside his house, the trespassing, and the threatening visits. Every word carried the weight of weeks of fear. The officers listened carefully, jotting down notes. Then they stepped outside to inspect the yard, the driveway, and the mailbox.
John followed, anxious.
Every step the officers took felt like a trial, every shadow seemed like it might hide an HOA operative ready to intervene.
Minutes later, one officer spoke. "We don't see any legal violations on your part. You're outside the HOA, correct?"
"Yes,"
John said, relief mixed with lingering fear. "I have no connection to them at all." The officer nodded.
"Then legally, they have no authority here. The letters, threats, and trespassing can all be considered harassment.
If anyone from the HOA comes onto your property again, we will take immediate action." Just as John exhaled, a sudden movement caught his eye.
From across the street, a figure appeared, someone he recognized from previous visits. It was an HOA officer, clipboard in hand, walking slowly toward John's house. His posture was casual, but the intent behind his steps screamed confrontation.
The officers noticed too.
One stepped in front of John, hand on his radio. "Sir," the officer called out, "you need to stay where you are.
Identify yourself."
The HOA officer paused, glanced at the police, and tried to speak, but the words faltered.
His confident demeanor cracked under the authority of the uniformed officers.
I was just checking," he stammered. "No," the officer replied firmly.
"You cannot enter his property. This is private. You are harassing this resident."
The HOA officer muttered something under his breath and turned back, clearly frustrated.
John felt a strange mix of satisfaction and adrenaline. He realized the police presence wasn't just protection, it was validation.
Someone recognized that the threats he'd endured were real, unjust, and illegal. As the sun disappeared completely, the officers stayed for a few more minutes, ensuring that John's property was secure. One of them said, "We'll patrol the area. If you see any suspicious vehicles or receive more letters, call immediately.
You have every right to be safe in your own home." John nodded, his chest heavy with relief.
Yet a small knot of tension remained.
He knew this didn't mean the HOA had given up.
Their methods had escalated before, and now, with the police involved, he suspected they might try something even more cunning.
When the officers finally left, John stood at the doorway, staring at the empty street.
The evening was quiet again, but the shadow seemed different, closer, sharper. He realized that even though he had authority and the law on his side, the psychological battle was far from over.
That night, John sat by the window, replaying the day in his mind.
The police had arrived, the HOA had been challenged, and yet the tension remained. He felt a strange shift inside himself. Fear was no longer controlling him, he was learning to channel it into vigilance, into preparation, into readiness to confront whatever came next. For the first time in weeks, John allowed himself a small thought: he wasn't alone. The law, his evidence, and his resolve were now his allies. The HOA could threaten, intimidate, and test him, but they could no longer hide in the shadows and scare him silently.
And somewhere deep in the night, as he listened to the quiet hum of the neighborhood, he knew the real test was yet to come.
The letters, the visits, the intimidation, they were not just harassment. They were a challenge. And John was ready to face it head on.
The next morning, John woke to an uneasy calm.
The street looked ordinary, neighbors walking their dogs, the sun casting golden light on the pavement, but inside, John felt like the calm before a storm.
He knew it was coming. The HOA had pushed boundaries, escalated threats, and tested him.
Today, it seemed, they had decided to confront him directly. Around noon, there was a deliberate knock at the door.
John's heart skipped. He peeked through the blinds. 2 men in suits, HOA representatives he recognized from past encounters, stood outside.
One held a clipboard, the other had a folder. They looked confident, almost smug. John took a deep breath, grabbed his folder of letters and photos, and stepped onto the porch. He held his head high.
"You are on private property.
You cannot threaten or harass me," he said firmly. "If you do, the police will be called." The man with the clipboard smirked.
"John, you don't understand. These rules apply to all residents.
You need to comply immediately, or legal action will be taken."
John shook his head. "I am not part of your HOA. You have no authority over me. Your rules do not apply.
The police are aware of your harassment.
This ends now."
The second man opened his folder and started listing complaints, hoping to intimidate him.
"We have reports of violations, decorations, landscaping, and..."
John interrupted calmly but firmly, "All of these so-called violations are irrelevant.
I am outside your jurisdiction. You cannot legally enforce your rules on my property.
Every attempt to do so has already been documented. The police have seen your harassment firsthand." The men paused, realizing that John was serious, prepared, and no longer afraid.
The smirk on the clipboard officer's face faded slightly. He glanced at his companion, then back at John. One of the men tried one last tactic. "John, think carefully. We could escalate this. Liens, fines, complaints, your neighbors." John cut him off, voice steady, unwavering. "Go ahead. Make your threats.
I have evidence, the police, and the law on my side.
You cannot intimidate me anymore."
The 2 men exchanged a silent, tense glance.
Their confident posture faltered under John's resolve. After a long moment, they nodded curtly and began to retreat down the driveway, muttering under their breath.
John watched them go, every muscle tense, ready to call the police at the first sign of trouble, but none came. The confrontation had ended. John felt an unusual mixture of relief, triumph, and lingering adrenaline. He had stood his ground. The HOA had tried to intimidate him, escalate threats, and challenge his peace, but it hadn't worked.
Over the next few days, the letters slowed.
The cars no longer lurked. The strange footsteps stopped. John realized the battle was over, not because the HOA had given up, but because he had claimed his power, documented everything, and shown he would not be intimidated. Standing on his porch one evening, looking at the quiet street, John felt a profound sense of victory. His home, once a place shadowed by fear, was now his sanctuary again. The oak tree outside swayed gently in the breeze, and for the first time in weeks, John smiled. He had faced threats, harassment, and fear, and he had emerged stronger and more confident. But deep inside, he knew this experience had changed him. He had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite fear, documenting injustice, and seeking help when needed. As the sun set, painting the sky in orange and red, John took one last look at the mailbox, the driveway, and the quiet street. The letters and threats were gone. The dark cars were gone. The HOA had retreated. And John, for the first time in a long time, felt completely safe in his own home. He returned inside, closing the door gently behind him, and sat in his favorite chair, reflecting. This was more than a victory over a homeowners association, it was a victory over fear itself. He had stood firm, documented evidence, involved the law, and refused to be intimidated. And somewhere deep in the evening breeze, as the neighborhood settled into quiet darkness, John smiled knowingly. He had faced the storm and now, he was ready for anything. The neighborhood of Maplewood Lane had returned to its quiet rhythm. Birds chirped in the morning sun, neighbors chatted over fences, and the familiar hum of life settled back into the streets. But inside John's home, things were different. The peace outside mirrored the calm within, yet John carried a quiet sense of strength that hadn't existed before. He sat at his kitchen table, looking through the folder of letters, photos, and videos that had once filled him with fear. Now, it was a record of his courage.
Each page, each image, told a story not of harassment, but of perseverance.
John reflected on the weeks that had passed. The letters, the cars, the footsteps, the threats, they had all been terrifying. At times, he had felt powerless, trapped in his own home by rules he didn't even have to follow. But through it all, he had learned something profound: fear could be faced, and justice could be claimed, even against those who seemed powerful. He thought about the police who had stood by him, listened carefully, and ensured his safety. He thought about the legal advice from his friend Mike, which had given him the confidence to stand his ground. Most of all, he thought about himself, how he had faced intimidation and refused to back down. John realized that the battle with the HOA wasn't just about rules or fines. It had been about his home, his peace of mind, and his right to live without fear. He had learned that knowledge, preparation, and courage could overcome even the most persistent threats. As he walked through his garden, now quiet and untouched by intruders, he thought about his neighbors. Some had remained distant, unwilling to help. Others had been kind. John understood that not everyone would support you when trouble comes, but the real strength came from knowing your rights and standing firm. Later that evening, John stepped onto his porch, the sky painted with the soft glow of sunset. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly free. The oak tree swayed gently in the breeze, shadows danced lightly across the yard, and the mailbox stood empty. The threats were over, at least for now. He smiled, quietly speaking to himself, "This house is mine. My life is mine. No one can take that away." And as the night settled over Maplewood Lane, John knew something else: he had grown. Fear would always exist in life, but now he had seen how to face it. He had learned to document, to seek help, and to confront threats without losing control. That lesson, he realized, was far more valuable than any victory over the HOA. For anyone watching his story unfold, John's experience held a clear message: knowledge and courage are stronger than intimidation. Standing up for yourself is not just legal, it's necessary. Fear can be faced, and peace can be reclaimed. The letters would never come again. The dark cars would no longer linger. And the quiet street of Maplewood Lane would return to its simple, peaceful rhythm. But John knew that in his heart, he had changed forever. He had discovered something everyone needs: the power to protect their home, their peace, and themselves. And as he closed the door gently behind him, he felt it: the calm, the strength, the quiet triumph of someone who had faced a storm and emerged victorious.